Good afternoon, learners. I am Vayunandan from the Faculty of Public Administration, School of Social Sciences. Welcome you to this second session. I think earlier session we had discussion on the public choice theory and its relevance. In this session we will be discussing the systems and behavioral approach views of Barnard and Herbert Simon. In this session, along with me, Dr. Dolly Matthews is also there to discuss on the various issues or views of these two approaches. I think last session, you heard about the public choice theory. So one of the important components of public administration which we come across are the various approaches and theories of organization. Apart from classical school, which has contributed to the classical approach or theory, the other which we come across is the human relations by Elton Mayo and his team. Then we come across very important aspect of theories is the behavioralism and systems. If you look into the organizational theories, where we can try to segregate, one try to approaches try to provide for the structuring of organization, which is they try to look into the physical aspects of organization. Then when we come towards the human relation, which talks about the social aspects of organization, which talks importance of the interpersonal relations and human beings at work and informal organization. Then we comes to the another aspect, that is the behavioral approach, which also is the extension of human relations, but more tries to look from the scientific angle, that is more emphasis on the scientific investigation. The premises it starts that the human behavior can be also scientifically investigated. This approach is the response to the traditional inadequate contribution made by earlier classical school. And apart from that, we have the systems, which talks about everything is a system. Within that you have subsystem, and everything works towards the realizing the whole, but every subsystem has its own to realize. So in this context we will be discussing two important scholars. One is Chester Barnard, the other is we have the Simon. So I request now Dolly Matthews to present her views on the systems approach of Chester Barnard.
Thank you, Professor Vayunandan. As has been so well explained by my colleague over here, that we will be in fact dividing this entire discussion into two parts. The later part will be discussed by Professor Vayunandan himself, and he will be discussing on Herbert Simon's view and the behavioral approach in public administration. But we begin the discussion basically with the systems approach, the contributions of Chester Barnard. No doubt David Easton is also one of the eminent thinkers in systems approach, but right now, because of the paucity of time, we will be only discussing Chester Barnard in the systems approach to public administration. Before we in fact discuss in detail about Chester Barnard's contribution vis-a-vis systems approach in public administration, we will be briefly seeing as what does one mean by a system, or what does a system convey for an ordinary person. For instance, we may be in fact we may be talking about various kinds of systems. Our body is also a physical system, a biological system. Our country has a political system. Our society has a social system. We have an economic and financial system for our country. So all are various types of systems dealing with different aspects or spheres of public life. But then what does basically a system mean? A system is basically the first and the foremost thing that a system means or conveys or defines, as we define system, is that it needs to have a set of elements. Not one element, but a number of elements, a set of elements. So these elements are in fact a very part and parcel of a system. As we see right now in the PowerPoint slide, the first slide, if you see, that I have said that system is basically a set of elements. And these set of elements go into interaction with each other. They interact, they interrelate, and they interconnect with each other. why they need to interconnect with each other, why all these elements need to interrelate with each other. They have to function as a whole to achieve certain objectives for which that system has been set up. So on the whole, a system includes or has various sets of elements which interact, interrelate and interconnect with each other so as to function as a whole, so that they can achieve the purpose or the very objective for which that system has been set up. So when we in fact see the second slide, in the second slide we can in fact see as what are the characteristics or certain properties that make up a system. As I had already said to you, that it constitutes a set of elements, and that is elements in the sense variables are there, subsystems are there in a system, and they need to interact. So the first and the foremost point or a characteristics of a system is to be, there has to be an interaction among its various subsystems, among its various elements, among its various variables that a system is in fact based on. The second most important characteristic, as you see it in the slide here, is boundary. What does this boundary mean for a system? As we see, any organization or any administrative system, or for that matter our own biological system, is having some confine, having some structure, having certain objectives. All this in fact lay down the boundary of that organization. What an organization is striving for, or what a system is striving for, what objectives it is trying to fulfill, all those determine the confines, the boundary of that organization or of that system. So every set of elements that constitutes the system has its own boundary around it. But this boundary, it's porous. This boundary is permeable. It is in fact penetrable vis-a-vis the environment. It is not a closed system. No system can be a closed system. Every system has to be an open system in order to survive, in order to always keep on achieving its objectives. So when we say environment, that is the third important characteristic, as you see it in the second slide. After interactions, they have a boundary around them, and the third most vital of all the characteristics of the system is environment. Environment meaning the context or the situation in which that system is working, the context of the situation or the circumstance in which that organization or that system is placed. So when we see it in the context of an organization system, what does an organization system relate to? Or for that matter, what does an administrative system relate to? Definitely when I say system, any system need to have the basic traits or the characteristics as I have already highlighted in the first two slides. Set of elements should be there, subsystems should be there, all variables have to be taken care of, and all these elements and variables interact, these subsystems interact with each other, and they in fact are concerned very much with the environment in which they are operating. So when I say vis-a-vis the organization or organization as a system, what does it relate to? Definitely with those characteristics and with those traits that in fact goes very well with any kind of a system. So here when we see the third slide, we have to in fact see very importantly as what does this highlight. As you all will be seeing, input, transformation and output. These are the three processes an organization system need to have. In order to be a system, it needs to have an input process, a transformation process and an output process. Now what does that entail? As you see down there, environment is also there, which is also one of the most important characteristics, as I said before, of a system. So that means this environment plays a very crucial role in making this organization system work. How? The organization is placed in which environment? We all know that organizations work in the societal environment. They are affected by all influences of the environment, of the context in which they are placed. They are affected by the political influences, by the social influences, by the economic influences, by technological influences, by global influences, by environmental influences. So all these influences form a part and parcel of the larger system, and that is the environment in which that organization is working. So from this environment, if you can show the third slide please, if you can see this environment, it in fact sends various inputs. Please show the third slide, yeah. It sends various inputs to the organization system. This whole is an organization system, and from the environment, what goes into the organization system are the inputs. And what are those inputs? Say for instance, the environment is basically the society, and the society wants certain requirements from that organization. Certain objectives they want that should be fulfilled by that organization. So they send their own demands. send their own needs, their requirements to the organization, which they want that the organization should fulfill for them. Along with the demands, needs and requirements, what again goes to the organization is the resources, manpower, even information. All such information and resources are also taken from the environment by that very organization. So various inputs are required by the organization from the environment. So environment is a very important larger system in which the organization is functioning, because the organization takes all its input from this environment, from the society where it is placed, where it is set up or where it has been conceived or established. Once we talk about inputs, we go to the transformation process, the conversion process or the decision making process. What happens in this process is that these demands, resources, information, what all requirements and all the environment has placed as input to the organization are converted, are transformed. Decisions are taken as through various machines and various materials, various procedures, even people, their activities, all in fact churn out these inputs into outputs. They transfer these inputs into outputs, outputs back to the environment. And these outputs may take the form of some new services to the society on the basis of the demands and their needs, or some new policies on the basis of the information that has been provided to the organization from the environment. So sometimes new policies, new laws or new services can go to the environment or to the society as output. And also sometimes once these outputs are in fact sent or re-entered into the environment may in fact again go through them, these outputs, these new services or these new laws or policies that have come up, and may require some kind of a change in them, may require some kind of a modification in them, or may not be happy or satisfied with the outputs. So they may send a feedback again, as you please show the slide again. Yeah, they may in fact take this outputs from the organization, and then this output is again on the basis of what the society or the environment is satisfied or not satisfied with, are sent as feedbacks to the organization again. So those feedback again acts as input. So this entire thing goes on as a cycle. It is entirely a chain, and there is where it is a system. Input getting into the conversion process, getting transformed into outputs, again it is sent back to the environment, again the environment or the society for that matter goes through it, and if find not satisfied or want some changes, sends the feedback again as inputs to the organization, and hence the system works as a cycle. Now we will in fact see as how Chester Barnard has in fact, you can put off that slide please. Yeah. Now we will in fact basically focus on how Chester Barnard tries to see public administration or tries to see the administrative processes from the systems approach angle. He in fact says, as we take it a little further from the third slide, that is saying that Chester Barnard in fact considers that organization is a system which is subordinate to a larger system. What is the larger system? Definitely the environment in which the organization is working. It is placed in a larger system, that is the society. So it is subordinate to that larger system, that is the society, because from this environment, from this society only it is getting inputs, and therefore it is they are partial systems and they are dependent on these comprehensive and larger systems, that is the environment, that is the society per se. Again he stretches a little forward and he says that what makes an organization? A system. How does an organization becomes a system? He says three important things are vital for an organization to be considered as a system. That is, there has to be a common purpose. And this common purpose has to be achieved by the people willingly. Means the people should be willing to act or to serve or to function. And they should be able to communicate to each other. So communication, common purpose and willingness to serve or to function becomes the three important necessities of making an organization a system. He also adds another word to this organization system by saying organization as a cooperative system. How it becomes cooperative? As I said, system is made of elements. Elements may be the subsystems, the people, the structure, the activities they are performing. They all need to be interacting. So an organization is also interacting. all its variables, all its elements, all its people need to interact, all its level needs to interact with each other in a cooperative way so that the ultimate objective of the organization gets fulfilled. If it is no cooperation or interaction is taking place, then an individual as such can't do all the work himself. So cooperation emerges from within an individual. He in fact wants that he cannot fulfill a particular objective he wants to achieve because he himself can't do it. So he looks forward to other individuals in the organization to help him in achieving that objective. So organization solicits for that matter or involves for that matter the cooperation of all individuals in that organization, and hence Chester Barnard says that organization system need to be a cooperative effort, need to be a cooperative system so as the organization is able to achieve its objectives. Then he further says to keep the people in the organization, to make the employee always adhere to the orders of the superior, inducements or incentives can play a very important role, and both material and non-material incentives should coexist because that will in fact create an equilibrium in the organization to sustain the employee and always making him willing to serve. So in case his net satisfaction overweighs or outweighs these dissatisfactions, then he will be in fact there in the organization always contributing to his best. After saying that organization is a cooperative system, Barnard in fact moves a little ahead to the concept of authority. He says that what is an authority? He defines authority as the character of a communication or the order which is given by an executive or given by a superior, by virtue of which it is accepted by a subordinate in the organization as governing or guiding the actions he is going to contribute or he is contributing. So there are two aspects to this aspect of authority, to this concept of authority, negative and subjective as well as objective. How does it define the subjective aspect of authority? That a subordinate is taking the communication as authoritative. But when it comes to the objective aspect of authority, it is the character of the communication by virtue of which it is being accepted. And if the communication or the order is accepted by the subordinate, the authority of that communication is confirmed and established. And as Barnard says, that if a communication or an order is authoritative or is accepted by the subordinate, it has to fulfill some 4 conditions. That is, the communication should be understood by the person who has to comply with it. Secondly, the communication or the order by the executor should not be inconsistent with the objectives of the organization and for that matter of his own personal interests also, and he should be able to mentally and physically comply with such orders. So if these 4 requirements are fulfilled, then the order can be well taken and accepted by the subordinate. And therefore here is where Barnard in fact shifts from that classical approach, the traditional approach to public administration, where it was always considered that authority rests at the apex level, it is always centralized. No, he says that the authority is basically the acceptance of any order or communication by the subordinates. That confirms the authority of that order, not at the apex level but at the bottom level. Then after the concept of authority, he says about the zone of indifference, that is, there is a zone of indifference that surrounds this authority. Now what does this zone of indifference mean? According to Barnard, he even refers to it as zone of action or zone of acceptance. That is, within this zone, within this periphery, the executive or the superior is free to act, is free to pass orders. And on the other hand, if every order is within this zone, the subordinate also accepts this without any problems, without any difficulty. He accepts all these orders. And the size and the nature of this zone will be well determined by the inducements the subordinate will be getting from the organization. If he gets net satisfaction which is more than the dissatisfactions, then automatically the zone will be wider and the range of orders which the superior will be giving and will be accepted by the subordinates will be also of a greater or of a wider range. But if the inducements or the incentives what the subordinate gets or the employees get from the organization is very limited, then the zone will also to be very narrow, and the superior can only give a limited range of orders. So a superior or an executive has to be very well concerned about, he should be very conscious of about the range of this zone in which he can in fact pass the orders, and that can be well accepted by the subordinate. So he has to be very careful about what kind of orders he is passing and whether it falls within the zone of acceptance by the subordinates. Then he talks about informal organization, which he considers to be very important, and it should coexist with the formal organization, is what Barnard in fact emphasizes. He says that what is an informal organization? It is somewhat a composite, or it is an aggregation of personal contacts, of interrelationship or interactions among the employees within the organization, and therefore it is in fact a sort of a small composite group, and they do not in fact, may not have any formal structure for that matter per se, and also they may not in fact be gathering together or coming together, or these interrelationship or connections may not happen necessarily because of any for achieving certain purposes. It may just happen from within because of a need to just relate to each other, but they play a very important role, a very crucial role in laying down the foundation, or at least helping it aids in the development or in the growth of formal organization. Rather, it creates those favorable conditions for the rise of formal organizations, and hence they both need to coexist with each other, both formal and informal. And finally, he in fact says the most vital of his contributions to the administrative processes is the function of an executive, on which the entire onus of the cooperative effort lies. On the executive, he has to perform three vital functions. What are the functions of the executive? He has to first of all provide communication in his organization, communication system in the organization, and for this matter he has to define the organizational positions. He has to lay down the duties, the specific responsibilities of each and every person in the organization. He has to come out with the division of work and also lay down the organizational chart. And in pursuance of this provision of communication to the organization, he has to also recruit people. He has to recruit men with the desired qualifications and offer them incentives. So he has to, the first and the foremost function of the executive is that he has to enable a very well defined communication system in the organization. The second most vital function of the executive is that he has to solicit or ensure that every person in his organization contribute to the ultimate objective of the organization, and for this purpose he may sometimes give them education or training, or give them incentives, and sometimes even supervise and control. In all, he has to maintain the morale of his subordinates at a very high level. Then only they will be contributing and willing to serve. Then the third and the last function of the last not the least, is that he in fact can go in for the formulation of the objectives of his organization. And not only that he is formulating, he should also ensure that it should be widely accepted by the subordinates, by the people, by the employees of his organization. And why these three functions are crucial, or why he has highlighted these functions of the executive as important? Because this will in fact help, the performance of these functions will help the executive to take the organization or to keep the organization in a cooperative form. Because as he has already defined, what is an organization? It is a system of consciously coordinated activities or forces of two or more persons, in which he categorically states that it has to be a conscious effort. Coordination has to be consciously done by the executive. So performance of these functions enable the executive to keep the organization in a consciously coordinated manner, in a cooperative effort, or in a cooperative systematic way. I hope now we can in fact shift to the behavioral approach discussion with Professor Vayunandan, discussing with Herbert Simon School of Thought on Public Administration.
Thank you, Dolly. I think you have very elaborately and clearly discussed about the systems theory and the contribution of the Barnard in relation to the systems theory. Just reiterating what Dolly has said, that see, the advantage of Barnard is he stands in between the systems and behavioral approach. As Dolly has rightly pointed out, in relation to the systems theory, he started with organization as a cooperative action or a cooperative system. Then organization is survived because of three important elements like common purpose, willing to contribute, and communicating each other. Then also he talks about the acceptance theory of organization, that is acceptance theories of authority, where the person who is to order, which is in classical we have seen that it is more of top down, where it is more of acceptance. So the character of the communication should include that 4 conditions where the person has to, if at all, to be accepted the communication or order. Then ultimately we come up to the formal and informal organizations, where he says the formal organizations are artificial systems born out of the informal organizations, which are natural systems, and they exist side by side. In the process of functioning, the formal organization becomes informal, and informal organization is structured by formal organization. And if one dies and other, disappears. So these are some of the important things which we try to understand. So what I am trying, and then also ultimately he has a lot of faith in the executive. So executive function is one of the very important function. That is, we know of, it is a general nature of function, but it is like he tries to equate the executive function with the nervous system, that is brain, in relation to the parts of the body. So if to operationalize the organization, the executive function is most important. And he gives the example of also the vice chancellor teaching in a class, or a manager selling a product. That does not constitute executive functions. So he said that executive function is something to operationalize. As you have seen a system in all, see, when you say that the third function, there is formulation of the purpose and objectives, where he has to formulate those policies or objectives which are to be almost accepted by all the contributors of the organ, and it has to be divided, fragmented in various levels. And it is the duty of the executive, who is of general nature, to coordinate, that is where system where of their own. So, and ultimately he says that the function of the executive is to, to synthesize physical, biological and the social factors of organization. So this is, one way looking at from the point of system, other way looking from the behavioral point of view. So coming to the behavioralism, which we try to discuss. See, what is, as I said, we all know that the Elton Mayo and his team has stressed upon the important aspect, that is the human aspects in organizations. So they were other way too extreme. Whereas the classical were other side extremes, talking about the physical aspect of organization. And if I remember one, important scholar quoted, whereas classical talks about organization without people, whereas human relation talks about people without organization. So there has to be a mix of both. So in the response to that, I think behavioralism try to focus upon it, that in combination of that a mix has to be there. So that way they talk about not only formal and informal, like you have seen even in Barnard case, he talks about both are important, formal and informal. So in that sense, what way we are finding different of human relation, the behavioralism from the human relation. So one thing is the understanding of the behavioral scholars, who have contributed to the behavioralism. They feel that we can have a scientific study of the human behavior. So before we try to attempt to study about the organization, try to study about the human behavior, in what way the human behavior, why people behave, understand why the people behave as they do. Not only the formal behavior, they also want to look at such subjective behavior such as attitudes, beliefs, expectations, motivation and aspirations, which we can be get through the informal organization. So that is the understanding, where at one level you are trying to look from the formal angle, at another level you are trying to look at the informal angle. And the other important is they also want to seek knowledge, I think, which is useful in response to the problems of economic, the political, religious, educational or personal nature, by studying the behavior of the human beings as individuals or as the members of the primary groups or formal organization or social institution. And one of the other important is it is an interdisciplinary approach they adopt, because earlier case you have not seen any where they try to adopt the interdisciplinary approach. Here the behavioralists try to look from the interdisciplinary approach, because see, they take the assistance of tools, techniques and methods of social psychology, social anthropology and sociology. Why? Because you are studying the human behavior. When you are studying the human behavior, you have to understand the social anthropology. What do you mean by social anthropology? Behavior of a man in social situations. And when you say social, what is called the psychology. What is the social psychology? No doubt psychology is nothing but science of human mind. If you say social psychology, it is a science of behavior of an individual in a society. Then sociology. What is sociology? Study of a society, because the man comes from a society. So without understanding of this, without taking the assistance of sociology, anthropology and psychology, you cannot understand the behavior of the person. And if you want to really scientifically investigate, you have to take their assistance. So this is the understanding of the behavior scholars who try to contribute to the behavioralism. Then coming to the one of the very important, as I said, the Barnard stands in between as a system, as also as a contributor to the behavioralism. Then coming to the Simon who was highly influenced by the Barnard contribution,
yes.
And one way he contributed to the one of the very important, what we call the one of his book, what is known as Administrative Behavior, a study of decision making process in administrative organization, which was published in 1947 and which got Nobel Prize in 1978. And he talks, no doubt, all the classical organizations or other, they try to look at from the point of action, how the action has to be, put in practice. So the organizations were set to implement certain action. That means there is always a decision, and that is to be implemented. But they never try to look into that, what is that decision, how the decision is arrived, why we need decision. So this is what I think there he starts his administrative process, which were contributed to the decision making process, or what you call the first thing. Before he tries to talk about the decision, first of all he criticized the classical school. First thing is, we all know that the classical school, one of the greatest contribution is principles of organization. Based on that, the organization should be designed. And number of principles have been formulated by a number of classical scholars. So upon that, I think if you take the Simon, he stands high in the criticism of classical principle. He says there are pro-ops, they occur in pairs. And he gives example, one principle contradicts the other principle. Like the example he gives that look before you leap, and same way is followed by he who hesitates is lost. Likewise, if you take unity of command, if you take the span of control. In the span of control, he says that, it should be only limited number of people should be, so the span of control will be more effective. If you have limited control, limited number, you have a tall hierarchical organization, then in case of it becomes ineffective.
Yeah, span of control, minimum number of.
When you say minimum number, you have a tall organization.
Yes.
Then where the hierarchy says you should have minimum supervisory levels. So that contradicts
the span of control.
So the same way you have the what other you call unity of command. You says that one boss or one superior officer to
one subordinate.
But when you take the principle of specialization, that contradicts.
Number of specialists can be there.
So this is what in that it tries to build up. They are more of what is called
contradictory.
Contradictory, and they are more to the experiences, came out of experiences. They may be relevant to the situational facts, but they cannot be universally applied, and they cannot be called scientific this is based on the premises he builds up what is called the administrative behavior. Then coming to the one of the very important aspect of his administrative behavior, I think, as I said, see everything as I said earlier also, the classical school has designed for action. He says that before action there is something decision. Unfortunately, the decision has been equated with some sort of a purpose or a policy which has been taken at once. At one point, at one level. It's not the case. Whatever level you take action precedes decision. So he says that it is integrated with the action at every level. So what is this decision? He says decision is nothing but the elimination of alternatives to one. What is this alternatives? Why you need alternatives? Because there are certain decisions to be arrived at based on alternatives. Because he says
decision can be taken.
Because there are certain. He gives an example. Suppose you want to type an H alphabet from the type machine. There is no need of. There is a highly rational. There is no need of alternatives.
Yes.
But there are certain alternatives available where you have to take the best available alternative, and that is nothing but elimination of alternatives to one is decision. So what he says that it's simply providing principle to design organization to take action or to implement action is not enough. You have to have same set of principle to arrive at a good decision. So it should have both the principles to arrive at decision, not only arrive at decision, but also implementing that decision. So that is called the administrative process.
Okay.
He called this as an administrative process. So then coming to this, what is this administration? Then he says this. So because he believes that administration is nothing but art of, he says, what he tried to understand, that administration is, basically is a process which takes place where you have decisions, and in the process you have to implement that decisions. Then what we understand is that, see, before, without knowing how the decisions are being arrived, you cannot talk about action. So first of all, you have to understand the various structure. Before looking at the structures and functioning of our organization, you have to look at the people working in the organization, how they behave, what makes them to behave.
And that will, for instance, decide the decision. Okay.
So first of all, what he says, that there are three sets of, levels, or what you call in an organization. You have top level, middle level, and lower level. Top level decides, lower level implements. In between you have supervisory staff, which influences the behavior of the lower level in accordance with the decision taken by the higher level, so that the decision is being implemented
by the lower level.
So it is more of not directing, it is more of influencing. Directing is one way of exercising authority, and influencing is other way of making the people to function the way
the effects one wants.
So that that knowing and studying about that is nothing but the administrative process. First of all, you should know how they have been influenced and how their behavior has been influenced, to see that the decision taken at the top level is carried out. So that is what, without understanding of that, you cannot talk about organization. So this is what I think we, it is, sets is, administrative process or decision making premises. Then one of the, because I don't want to discuss all, because we have already discussed in the unit, but one thing which I think want to discuss is one of the very important thing is the rationality, rational decision making. What do you mean by rational decision making? Is it possible? Because the person who was, very much influenced by that, we can also study the human behavior in a scientific manner. But what is this rational decision making? Is it possible to have a rational decision making? So what we understand is that if you want to have a rational decision making, when you say decision means naturally you have alternatives of which you have to take the first best, and of you should say the best, you have to have all kinds of information relating to that alternatives. Suppose if I adopt this, if I take this alternative as my decision, and what should be, what is its outcome, and what, and that way you have to have a complete knowledge. And he says that because of the various things taken into consideration, he feels that it is highly impossible to have a rational, because of neither having adequate information, time, because of your values influence you, because of the position, because of the status, because of the ethical condition, because of the moral condition, because of the various other aspects.
And human beings can't be rational.
So because after all we are human beings, we are not machines. So naturally, because of all these things, he feels that it is highly difficult to take a rational decision. So what it can be, because he disputes the economic man. Economic man, what you call, maximizes. But he disputes. It is impossible to have that kind of a decision which maximizes because of these conditions. Either because you said the limitation on his part for having lot of information, or because of the values, presence of values like ethics, moral, various things. So what he tries to say that, apart, not really talking about rationality, because what he finds that, I think, human behavior, he feels neither totally rational nor totally non-rational. So in between, what he finds that, and he falls back to a concept what is called bonded rationality. What is this bonded rationality? Because as we said earlier, because it's highly difficult to have a rational, rational decision.
Human beings can't have that computational mind.
Even we are talking, there are a number of things which comes up. So what we say that bonded rationality is nothing but, I think, the decisions which are good enough. And other way, he tries to come out with a satisficing. What is this satisfying? It is between satisfy and suffice. So it is not completely satisfactory, nor, I mean, what you call, totally maximizing. So it is a satisfying, is good enough, fair enough.
Right.
So you have seen in any election, voting we cannot give 100 total votes to one person.
Oh, yeah.
In the same way, your decision making capacity is also reflected in your behavior. In the same way, everything is everywhere it is behavior. So you cannot give total votes, any person does not get total votes.
Right.
So it is a common. So in that same sense, he says satisficing. So he comes in between what he calls you have one side economic man, other side you have a
administrative man.
You have social man. One is maximizing, other is satisfying. And in between you have an administrative man, you is satisficing.
Oh.
So one maximizes, one satisfies, one satisficing.
Okay, combination of both. Yeah.
So this is where the importance of his administrative man comes into picture. So he said maximizing and what is called the satisfying is a relative term. So sometimes satisfying may also maximize it.
So, but then if Simon insists on this behavior of the subordinates or the employees being vital in decision making, how is this behavioral approach now seeing that all decisions in an organization are satisfying because they are generated from the actions and behavior of the employees in the organization, especially of the lower level.
Yes. So lower level. And that is what you have to take into consider, the environment, the informal and all this.
So
then when you take all this, you cannot have total
rational or optimizing.
It is impossible. So you see, any researcher has an hypothesis to go in.
Yes.
So the hypothesis may be tested, it may be right or wrong. You cannot say that I will prove in my hypothesis.
Yeah.
In the same manner, the Simon also went with the total facts. But later he realized, no,
that values are equally important.
So this is what I think we come across, and he tries to say in between he brings an administrative man, neither maximizes nor satisfies. It is satisficing, good enough, fair enough.
One is the economic man, the other is the
social man, human relations.
Okay, and then in the
between
middle is the
you get the administrative man. So who is a satisficing man. So this is what I think he tries to come out with a bounded rationality. Later, the person who was high in criticizing the classical theory uses the same principles in saying that if everyone behaves as he likes, what is the how they can achieve the organizational purpose, or how it can be an organizational behavior. So then he says administration is a process, and the process has to take place. So in the process, there has to be a group effort, cooperative action, cooperative system. In the process, what he says, that the organization through the process, like specialization, or through the some sort of inculcating loyalty to the organization, training, economic of the criteria of efficiency, then he tries to substitute the individual his behavior with the organizational behavior, and try to tune that person behaves in a manner which is in the interest of his own and also in the interest of the organization. So that is how we try to use these principles and try to say that, and uses the same principles of classical school, and that itself indicates how important are principles of classical school. I'll now leave it to Dolly Matthews.
Thank you, Professor Vairunandan. He has very lucidly presented the entire behavioral approach to public administration, and at least enlightened, I hope it would have definitely enlightened all our learners over there. And in case if you would like to in fact have any suggestions from your side, or you like some clarification, please do write to us, or you can in fact come up for the next EduSat session and let us know about it. And from logical positivism to being an satisficing man, how Herbert Simon has taken the employee or the person in the organization from very calculative or rational person to that of a person who falls short of that rationality, but at the same time he in fact sees all the alternatives in taking the best decision which are at his disposal, the alternatives that are at his disposal. And we have also seen as how behavioral approach in fact helps in analyzing the administrative processes of an organization. I hope we can in fact wind up with some kind of suggestion that in next EduSat session we would look forward to some kind of an interaction from your side too. Thank you so much.